historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight, Thursdays, what's happening in the world. Well, I do have some new information, not only from George Gammon's videos about their travels in Argentina trying to spend gold, silver, and Bitcoin, but there is now planned covert confiscation of gold in the United States. Not sure when this will happen or what the catalyst would be, but I have a number for you. The maximum IRA gold holdings, that will be the maximum that will be allowed. Anything over that will be confiscated. So we can start with that. And they will pay you market value, but who manipulates to pay the market value? Like we saw in 1933 in the Roosevelt era, they bought it at 20, suddenly they revalued it at 35. Thanks. Something like this again. And we see the weather, and even since last week, there's been how many X flares coming off the sun. We're coming into a trying time of food production. I'm looking at the USDA carryover stocks, and I can't believe how precise they were. We're talking about millions of tons, and they were like 1,000 pounds off of million-ton forecasts. Every single one: corn, soy, wheat. 100 million tons, but they were only off by 1,000 tons. I mean, they are just such soothsayers. I'm looking at the manipulated numbers across all the grain markets as well. And what this dovetails with that, hold on, let me get it. I'm trying to get up I got two browsers open with all types of different things here. The de-dollarization signs are across us and around us. I do not want that either. Hold on. I am lost in space with too many windows open. Anybody feeling it? There's a new grain exchange that's going to be starting. That is a BRICS-aligned grain exchange. And what are we going to see with this? It looks like all the quote-unquote BRICS nations are going to come together to set pricing in their own, I guess, exchange outside the U.S. dollar and outside the COMEX and outside the futures markets. So you're going to be looking at a price shift in the prices of grains, and oil will follow the same, because it looks like Saudi Arabia within a few months is going to announce officially they're joining BRICS, and that is the end of the petrodollar. Hence tonight's episode, we're going to have to shift with the changing world. When you look at that, and we're going to have to come to terms with it. These global changes are here. There's no way around it. I mean, it's just part of the cycle anyway. You knew it was going to get reset. The current things that we use to measure value aren't going to continue in the same fashion moving forward. So we can't continue to value the world in the same way that we did. So that needs to change. We're coming into like a new currency, a new monetary system based on the changes of what our magnetic field on the planet's going to do, and greater out into the solar system, the sun, obviously. But we can't grow as much food as we did. Prices of food are going to get really expensive. That is going to, knock everything out of kilter. If you're spending a majority of your wages on food, shelter, life gets really boring real fast. And then people start to get very angry even quicker. And governments understand this. They understand the cycle, the ups and downs. It's more of an ebb and flow of energy. So as we go through tonight, we're going to review a few things from the last week, but then also, where's the general trend going? I mean, Ransom and I, we're kind of on the trend here. We definitely this week have a parallel vision of where it's going to take us before the end of 2025. So Ransom, I appreciate you joining me. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go exactly like year by year, but it is becoming evident. And, that video that you sent me, it kind of put some pieces together, at least in my conspiratorial mind. I was thinking, why is it, so much the push for digital money? And that kind of put it together. And I don't mean digital money as in, like Bitcoin and other things to try to avoid, a decentralization tool kind of against the system to protect your wealth. What I mean is, it makes sense to me now why they want the masses to turn over to some kind of digital um, currency that's based on their banking system, because the banking system has a problem right now, in which they talked a lot about it, is that the people and entities around the world, including you know competitive monetary systems, if you have the actual money out of the bank, it's not in play anymore. And they can't do much about that because it exists and it's there. I mean, they were showing Argentina and their money just decreasing in value. But the fact remains, like here, when you have large amounts of money, the bank can't depreciate it as fast, and you have it in hand. And not only do you have it in hand, but you can use it because mostly everybody else doesn't realize that there will be a point in which that money is not worth anything. So it makes sense that they're going to change over to this digital, what is it, a CBDC or whatever, that's tied to your social credit score and how you behave. And this will eliminate, for one, people owning real things like large amounts of gold, right? Because that won't help them in that system. And I think that's the whole idea, is to transition people over to this idea of owning things that don't really exist. If you know anything about the gaming industry, it's set up now basically on a slot machine mentality, where you could win these imaginary things to make your digital character, your digital self, look different, act different, or appear different to other people. And at the same time, they're kind of adding this idea of, you're buying digital property, digital clothing, all of these things that are digitally not real in real life, right? You can't warm yourself with a digital blanket. But there was an episode of Black Mirror that kind of reflected this, no pun intended, in which people went to the point of even, showing little rebellious icons, right, to emulate somebody that sold out to the system. But they were going to cut their throat with this piece of glass, and the glass became like a little digital fad that everybody was wearing in the digital verse while they continued to be slaves, but pushing out that uniqueness that's actually the same as everyone else. And you see that in social media right now with people's flags and their little squares of different colors, trying to represent that they support this, that, or the other thing. And it's all this digital representation that's not real. Now, when they have generations of people accustomed to this concept and idea of, ownership in the digital fake world is more important than ownership in the real physical world, then you could see how they could steal people's, I don't know how you would call it, the future wealth, the wealth that they were going to have by birthright, inheritance of a nation or inheritance of a monetary system. All of that can be taken away slowly through this digital deception. And now we're seeing, like Neuralink's first patient blows my mind so much, and it gets into the computer mixing with his thoughts. And this is really, in my opinion, just kind of a joke, because it's more of an archaic form of technology. And I know that they have more advanced technology to link the human being to this digital system. And if they can convince everybody to, have more importance on digital money, in the backdrop, the real powers that be are collecting all the gold, all the silver, all the platinum, all the real estate, all the water rights, everything that actually matters to anyone that lives in the civilization that we're in. And at the same time, they're kind of giving people these fairy tales, like Elon Musk saying humans will be living in cities on Mars in the next 30 years. I just don't see that happening with the amount of radiation that's out there, or even on Mars. Now, maybe he knows something that I don't know about a leap in technology coming soon, and that might be actually the case. kind of through the headlines, they've been admitting different stuff. The first teleportation they admitted the other day, the transfer of information instantaneously to someplace else. And now we're talking about new definitions of quantum mechanics where they're squeezing, parts of atoms closer together in a way that they can start making new technologies and admitting to the public that some of these ideas are not science fiction, but in fact, science fact. And for some reason, a group of, elites or whatever you want to call them have been stacking away billions and billions of dollars into this black budget of technology that we don't even know about. And then, you mentioned all of the X flares. That would put everyone in a position, if we ever had like an X10 followed by an X20 or something, some really hardcore stuff that might actually put our system down. Guess what happens to all the suckers that totally invested in nothing but digital everything? Well, I'll tell you what happens. They don't have anything. And it seems to me that that's what the elite are counting on, that in the end, they will be they will have all the acquisitions made. They will have all of the properties, all of the precious metals, all of these different things, and they will own the market on it. And then from there, they can repeat a cycle of debt using their own, stockpiles of actual wealth in the way that they decide what it's worth in the new reset. And, they talked about a lot of things in there in that video that you sent me. Most of it being that, the realization that you have to have a market or a buyer for any good. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's Bitcoin, real gold, cash, food, drugs, whatever it is. The power has a value on it. And if you don't have a buyer, then that economic tool doesn't work. But when there is no food, and you have know-how, and you have food, you can make a new market with just things just like they used to do. I mean, because back in the day, they had no idea that you could stockpile wealth with zeros and ones and bring it out later, or use it to sway different, purchases around the world, and a way to hide from governments some of the taxes that they want. But the same thing is true if you have precious metals. It's not the idea that, when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, that you're going to just go out and start, pulling out shiny gold coins and silver coins and saying, hey, I want those chickens and I want that egg, because, that's not going to work. However, if you have a system where you can survive long enough for a new normalcy to occur, which would be on the other end of any reset, your children, or even you, depending on the time frame we're talking about, will be in one of the best positions ever, because you actually have some of those things that are still valuable to the institutions that will inevitably come back out. And I think they know that there's going to be this transformation of not only monetary system, but the way that people think about everything. And it's going back over to that feudalist system. And to ensure that, they're outright kind of showing the world that they are indeed culling the population. Or, you could look at it from a different way, maybe not so conspiratorial, and that there is a plateau and then a drop off of the regular population due to different things. Here's one like from InfoWars. I won't get into it, but basically they're pointing out the same thing I am, that mainstream media is now admitting that global fertility is falling. And what's so funny about this is because I hammered this right before the mainstream media started saying it. Now they're talking about it. Here's another one from Alt Market US, mass starvation. Here's why most America is completely unprepared. Well, let me tell you, that unprepared nature of food is what's going to aid in the population decreasing boom. It's going to be a boom in the opposite direction. Massive reduction in people. Here's another article from Newsweek, America's population time bomb. So everybody's coming to terms with the fact that the world is now having trouble reproducing. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal now because we have 8 billion people. But in several generations, that number exponentially decreases, and especially with some of these programs that they have going on. So if you're an elite person and you're wanting to reset, this would be the exact time that you would start all of the programs necessary to mastermind the next evolution of civilization. In other words, you would enact all your programs, not for now, but after everything gets reset, so that you'll have a handle on the power. And here's another one. London climate professor calls for culling of human population by pandemic with a very high fatality rate. So it's like they're pushing for the idea in all areas. Here's another one. Dutch woman 29 granted euthanasia. This kind of I'm going to say mental illness use, it was against the law in most places, and it still is. But now countries are changing over to this idea that, hey, we don't have to force people to do stuff, but maybe we can let them volunteer for it if we completely bombard them with propaganda about them being the problem of the entire world and the entire human suffering. So Dutch woman 29, she's granted euthanasia on the grounds of mental suffering. So we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Would that happen? Well, yeah, it happened. And here you go. Here's where the AI fits in to the shrinking population. Bumble founder says the future of dating is your AI, and it will date other people's AIs and hook you up with the best matches according to the AI. Now, you might think that sounds crazy, but in places like China and Japan, they're already using a lot of these kind of apps to tell them who to date. Now, that's kind of cool if you're the programmer and it's it's not nefarious what you put in there, and it does that with genuine matches. But what happens if you decide who's the match for who? Then we get into this weird idea where people are getting swayed to be in positions that they didn't even know they were directed to go in because they put their trust in a new system, in a new AI. And now the money's all going to be tied to that. So everybody that's alive will have to deal with this digital thing, or you could resort to things that I guess will be considered a black market in the future, which will be these digital currencies and gold and silver and stockpiles of product of different kinds, if you get my drift. And it could be anything, food. Unfortunately for us, the governments of the world know this, and that's why they're kind of stockpiling all of the resources themselves. That way, less of the population has the ability to have it. And I think the farmers in Europe have just now figured this out, and they might be saying no. So I'm seeing the stages definitely of a massive propaganda war against people, especially in Europe, where they've allowed their populations of newcomers to outnumber the amount of people that are native to the area, so to speak. So I'm seeing
that would never happen, dude. That would never happen.
It's already happened before, right? And now we have the tinderbox set up for people to be just angry enough and just distracted enough to worry about mass deportations and stuff like that, because, well, it's in their best interest. But they don't realize that they're being played from a higher level, so that they're all in strife. They're all doing the groundwork for any real world war, as far as nation factions intervening in these things. And I was going to get to it in a minute. Now you see around the world different politicians that might swing a certain way or another way, getting assassinated or attempted assassinated. And you could start in Japan and then just fast forward to now. How many Duke Ferdinand moments have we had already, and how many more will it take to get everybody in position for what they want?
Depends on how quickly the timeline needs to move along, and what event is determining the timeline. Because it does seem that it's a slow milk wealth trickle here. Now we can see the world splitting clearly. If you hadn't seen Putin and Xi Jinping, I mean, the absolute most royal state hero's welcome for Putin over in China was just off the hook. It was as lavish, as any state visit could be. And then our own politicians from the United States go over there, and they only have somebody like third rank down in some sub-parliamentary division just handshake and kick them onto the airplane. No red carpets, nothing. I mean, the difference of that alone shows you how much the United States is disregarded in China, how much disrespect they have for the United States, and how they've been planning for years to overtake. Since they control the manufacturing, I mean, obviously, if we go to robotics and many more of these types of systems, but the United States and the Western countries are going to be down for a minute in the economies and not so prosperous and able to purchase. If they're the manufacturing hub of all robotics and AI programming for robotics, how far ahead do you think they're going to run? They could choose to sell us or not. And it's not just chips. I'm talking fully functional robots in terms of Boston Dynamics, yes, but the things that are going to replace everybody else's jobs in terms of factory robotics, etc. If they say no and no more repair parts, then what? Okay, well, we start to grind to a halt slowly. They'll need people again until the economy is prosperous enough to start buying that technology once again en masse. But how far ahead would they be? And would they choose to even sell us the robotics at that point in the AI technologies, the coding? Because you look at American weapon sales, we never sell them the state-of-the-art stuff. Doesn't matter who they are. Everybody always gets second-rate, second-generation equipment. America always keeps it to themselves, the first gen. Would it not be the same with robotics and AI programming? And it would be exactly the same. So then we would always be getting second gen. Once you look at this world running away, and the cooperation between India, China, and Russia and Iran is absolutely just so many levels above anything that they're showing you in the news. Because I've really been starting to follow this. You know, I was talking, a year or so ago, especially with the Arctic Century. And Andy Schechtman from Miles Franklin and I have had a couple of different talks about this as well. I mean, this is going to run, and there's no stopping it. That's the whole point. It's a little bit difficult to stop. Because I wanted to come back to the grain exchange for the BRICS-aligned grain exchange. Now, if we just look at it from a numbers point of view, this in itself could entirely upset the global balance and availability of food. And what do we get every grand solar minimum? We get into this food inavailability that rocks society to the core. So before I even explain it to you, I would ask the question, do you think it's a good excuse why grains will be disrupted and there will be hungry spots on the planet as a way to explain away why there's hungry spots on the planet? That's how I would even preface it. Would this be a great excuse for food shortages? Because we're going to have to reshuffle the grain allocations, the grain markets, the grain delivery, the grain pricing. So the BRICS alliance accounts for 42% of all global grain production and 40% of world consumption. They're kind of even on that. Estimated output, 1.24 billion tons. Now they consume 1.23 billion tons. And we're only talking about Russia, China, India, and Brazil. So these break off and they go, and they only trade amongst themselves. They don't use dollars any longer. And their pricing is set by themselves, their trading block, not COMEX somewhere that's forcing down the prices. How will this affect the rest of Europe and the United States, Australia? It would break the markets, is what it would do. Because if we look right now at Shanghai Gold Exchange, they're offering about $200 more per ounce of gold that is being offered either in London or here in the United States. So traders don't have any allegiance. They're just sending endless amounts of gold. I guess over the last several months, 370 tons has gone through the Shanghai Gold Exchange just because of the arbitrage difference in the $200 per ounce. As I spoke about before, during the Lunar New Year, or Chinese New Year, this year they were encouraging citizens to buy 1 gram of gold. Give it as a gift, keep it. They had these cute little piggy banks made of glass where you could see your gold bead inside. But just in the last 2 weeks, that stopped. They told everybody, we've achieved our goals. Now the central bank needs to buy more gold. So please, citizens of China, start to buy silver. And obviously, since China said it first, an enormous amount of other countries in the region are also following along. But Thailand has been buying and a major silver producer forever. So this shift from gold to silver, watch a lot of things get drained out as well. And I think they're offering 50 cents more per ounce in Shanghai for silver than they are here. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're talking millions of ounces, that's a lot. Oil and energy also is going to split. 60% of the world's energy will be controlled by BRICS, and they are going to come up with their own trade unit called the unit. And this goes back into the central bank digital currencies and units of account. Now, there's a huge amount of new information coming out, and as of yet, there is no name for this entity. It's called the unit. And the BRICS, who are gold mining nations across Africa that are going to be joining, and those that produce energy, that in terms of OPEC, they're setting the rate for 1 gram of gold for 1 barrel of oil. Now, how will this play out into, excuse me, 1 gram of gold, 1 barrel of oil equals how many bushels of wheat? 1 gram of gold, 1 barrel of oil. Those are the two medium of exchanges that you can trade them 1 for 1. Now, they're going to use that 1-to-1 trade and swap it over into all this grain business here as well. So how many bushels? Unknown at the moment. It's unknown. But this is going to be a direct swap trading mechanism. Now, keep in mind, while all this is going on and they're switching monetary and currency systems, the US dollar will still be out there. It's just how much will it be used? And if it's outside of the realm of most of these countries, then that means our military is going to have to shrink because we just won't have the demand for all these treasury bills. I mean, yeah, we could print it ourselves, but then what would we do? Just make extra money printed for... That's not the same as loaning it out. And that's the whole thing about George Gammon's video, which I learned, and I was trying to understand the principle better is, yeah, all these dollars come flooding home, but most of them were just made out of thin air anyway as loans outside. They weren't treasury bills. Treasury bills and loans are two different things. So all the extra money that was given out to the world in terms of loans, if we were to come back to the United States, it would balance itself at zero because it was zero when it started. They just made the numbers on the computer and then they changed the balance sheet number and those people were able to buy a building. Okay, when that money comes back, it balances back to zero. What doesn't balance back to zero are all these treasury bills that we're selling out because there's interest due on those. I guess we could print to finance the military, but for how long? You can only print your own money for how long? That was the whole thing is this equivalent, the unit that's coming in, is absolutely going to dominate a minimum of 40% of the planet. And they're going to digitize this. So for an example of a real world assets, if you understand RWAs, I would highly suggest digging into it. RWAs are the equivalent of you understanding what Bitcoin is, what Ethereum is, and how they can write smart contracts on Ethereum and also Solana. The movements of monies like Litecoin and this sort of thing, Stellar Lumen's a little different. But if you are in the basics of understanding cryptocurrency world and realm, you first have to understand what Bitcoin is before you can understand the rest of it. And then you get into the Ethereum blockchain protocol where then you can write contracts on that called smart contracts. Once you get those two base layers, you can see how the world works. So what they're going to do is they're going to take like 100 barrels of oil equal to 100 grams of gold, which is 30, if you're going to do 28, about, let's say 3.5 ounces of gold, just to make it easy math, and we'll make it $2,000 an ounce, not 2,300 like it is now. So we're still looking at what? $7,000 for that value of the 100 barrels or the 100 grams of gold. We'll call it $7,000. That is going to be wrapped up into a contract that says this smart contract right here is worth $7,000. It's worth 100 barrels of oil. It's worth 100 grams of gold. It's convertible. And whoever owns that contract can then choose to keep it as their own store of value because it's going to be backed by gold or oil or grains, a physical thing, metals. Or you can choose to give it to somebody else to settle a debt. Then they are the owner of the physical gold behind that contract. This is the basis of the unit. And this thing is going to be going live in 2025. Hence, the word on the street that I got about the overt gold confiscation in America. They will not they will not confiscate your American eagles because it's coin of the realm, as I've heard it. Anything outside that coin of the realm, like if you're holding Krugerrands, you're holding Maple Leaves, you're holding Philharmonics, you're holding anything that's not an American mint gold coin, that can be confiscated. Also, collectibles will not be. But the over-confiscation then comes in terms of IRAs. So how much is your max allowable holdings of a gold IRA? That will be the max allowable amount of an American to hold gold. Anything over that IRA maximum will then be confiscated. And this all rolls together into one larger picture where we're at the end. We're not going to hyperinflate as of money coming back with devalued dollars to pay off debts issued that were spun out of thin air. Those will balance back to zero. What will not are these treasury bonds that we're going to need to pump into infinitum to try to then fund when there's no longer a line of buyers. And this is where it gets into this murkiness of what's the timeline on this? How much would our lives change? How much would our prices go up here in America natively? Let's see, these are some things I don't have answers for, but I have a basic understanding of somewhere by 2025, the unit is going live, and it will encompass 40% of the world's commerce and raw materials and foodstuffs. And at that point, we won't be able to pay for our military. I can't hammer that home enough at that point. And I'm not a fanboy of any war whatsoever. I am just get our troops. So we have so many problems here. The last thing we need to do is have, 800 or 1,800 military bases around the world, however many there are now. We just need to bring it back. We need to lay off. Got ourselves in so much trouble. Do you think Mali they wanted us out because there's an opportunity finally after 50 years to get us out? Get out. And it's going to be like that nation after nation, nation after nation. Just Americans get out. And it's already started to sweep across Africa. We're at some point not going to be able to afford our military any longer at the level it is now. And we're going to follow something just like Great Britain. And I wonder where that will leave our world, but the restructuring of it is going to be, well, fascinating for some if you're prepared, terrifying for others who are just holding on by, the coat strings in a hurricane here. I don't know, Ransom, which way do you think it's going to go? And have you heard about the unit? There's been quite a bit of talk these last few days about it. You heard anything about it?
Yes, actually, they have a whole these little. It's like superhero and supervillains. We have the Squad. I don't know if you've heard about the Squad, but it's the whole group of the Anglo-Saxon Empire, like Australia, Japan, and the United States and the UK, so we can combat and contain China. So we're gonna have the Squad versus the unit, right? And we see the lines dividing through Europe, Africa, and South America of the people that are either going with the dollar or they're going with the BRICS, right? But what I've been noticing is this seems to be all tied up to, the conflict that they're about to push. Where is everything going to realign? And, just judging by the headlines, let's see here. I'll put together a little weird picture what I think it's going to go. So we all know that China basically has the most abundance in rare earth elements. So in order to fight an AI robotic and I guess you could call it kinetic warfare that's everything but nukes. So all of our smart bombs, missiles, ballistics, all of that stuff. It all needs microchips and rare earth elements to make those chips, and so do all of our aircraft, plus all of our older equipment. And you kind of brought this up. So the only way that we would come out on top, if you're saying that the United States hasn't been compromised by a world government pulling its string. Say we're still some kind of sovereign entity over here. Best case scenario is we're holding back advanced technology to at the end of this battle. But before the battle, and let's talk about the battle we're talking about. So China is already showing moves that the first battle will probably take place in space. China rapidly developing space weapons with nukes, kamikaze satellites, and robots. Then over here, you got Russia launched research spacecraft for anti-satellite weapons. So we're going to go with the satellite warfare, which, if you know why that would be, that's strategic, and the robotic warfare on the ground. So whoever has the satellites still in the sky, well, they're the masters of the robots at that time. And then you got this whole idea of industry, right? So if all the countries started competing really fast in some kind of robotic commerce war for products or even military equipment, we would lose that war, obviously. Our manufacturing has been shut down. We really only export weapons and garbage here in the United States. I mean, that's basically it. Now, there's food also, but obviously in some kind of world war scenario, supposedly our leaders would be using our resources for us. But who knows if that's the case, considering the current form of our country right now is sold out to the highest bidder, whether they're foreign or not. So foreign entities are buying up all of the resources in the United States. It looks like a sinking ship or a company that's being partitioned and sold off piece by piece. And then in Europe, they're totally prepared for this upcoming war. Poland ramps up border with defenses, with bunkers and missiles. You got Germany talking about introducing conscription for all 18-year-olds. It goes on and on. You got Japan. They're ready to kick everybody out. World's friendliest country suddenly orders crackdown on foreigners, and a huge shock to some people. They were told from the top to find out, who doesn't belong here. Keep an eye on them, and not only keep an eye on them, treat them rudely and mess with them. Search them, find out what they have. So you're about to see some weird stuff progress. And then here, back to the digital currency. The Belgian government will intervene to ensure that prostitutes do as the pimps tell them, because they're there to protect the people. So in a new law in Belgium will allow pimps to seek government mediation if prostitutes refuse to basically work more than 10 times in a 6-month period. And they've introduced legislation. So we're talking about a totally crazy collapsing governmental system that targets its own citizens in the Western world with an upcoming world war. So how does that work out? Well, obviously, if you degrade the living situation of people in certain countries, it's real easy to motivate them if you tell them, hey, we just got to go over there and kill these people so that we can have a better time. It's classic, it's old, they've done it before, and they're setting up these multicultural shatter belts so that different sides of different ethno groups will choose one side or the other. And then, of course, on the bigger scale, those groups are going to go with their host countries that are picking a certain kind of currency, which is the BRICS, not the dollar. So you can kind of see where this is all getting played into a massive crunch. And then, everybody's talking about and hailing the stock market right now. And when I look at those big numbers on the stock market, I see the equivalence of the inflation in the dollar and the worth of those items being sold and traded and all of that stuff. Everything's inflated and it's ready for a crash. But as far as the world, kind of situation, it's kind of obvious that they are planning on spending out and draining the Western world's resources all the way through. And not only that, handing over your children to this massive population reduction event. And it seems, judging by the moves that all the countries are making and the massive predictive programming that's been through the last couple of years, this is going to be a faceless war. This is going to be a war of robotics, of hacking. And what does that mean for the everyday average citizen? Well, it means that they can implement fear on you at any time in any place of things just coming out of the sky looking for you to kill you, and then at the same time blame that for why they can't transport food, or why you can't get food, or why there's no power, and all of these different things. And then you get people used to being afraid of things coming out of the sky, and then you got this Pope guy over here about to hold a press conference on aliens, right? And the supernatural, so people are confused. It seems like they're about to dissolve the last 2,000 years, and we talk about this a lot. You have to get rid of the old to bring in the new. Well, part of the old is all of these worldwide religions that hold billions of people within their ideology. So you're going to have to do something with that. And a world war split down the middle by countries will also lead to splitting of ethnic groups and religious groups, and they will have the perfect divisive tribalism war to usher in their new system. Which what does that mean? Well, if all of these things from the old world were problems, you're going to have to get rid of those. So like national sovereignty, rights of religion or property, the right to travel to where you want to. All of these things are going to be turned off. And you see the footnotes in history being written right now. All of the countries are at a limit with the amount of migration that can come in. So they're having problems with culture clash, and then you have systems set up to push people in certain directions at the same time as preparing to maybe deport other people. So, I think of the Weather Underground as a little small concept that might be relevant in some of these Western countries, that whenever this world war starts, one side inevitably is going to win, which means the history will be written for that side, and the monetary systems and everything will be for that side of things and way of thinking for the new system, which will be just one system. And if they do that, they get rid of everything that came about before that, which includes all your natural and inalienable rights. And you can kind of see this attack on culture from every angle, whether it's your personal beliefs or the economy or how you are able to have food. And this is going to be a strange thing, because if we do this, I hope the U.S. will pull itself together like it has the potential to do and shown in the past that we could do. I mean, we did live through a Great Depression. We were, hard up for a little while, but things progressed. But how did they get it back going? Well, we had a major world war to redecide who gets the wealth for a time period. The question is it your side of the world that's going to be on that winning side, or are you the one that's slated to be in the poverty sector? And I think I sent you this link to the InfraGard. I bring this up every so often. It's a connection of citizens that report directly to the government about things that people are doing and things that they see. And we're seeing this on all levels. So now we have where was it? Here it is. I lost my spot there, but basically they're finding new ways to get around any legal rights that you have and find ways to spy and keep track of you. And now we have rumors, of different cells in the United States that are loyal to one of or more of these other groups around the world. So I see it at a special place that they're about to pull the plug. But don't disregard the Pope and what he's saying about extraterrestrials. And keep in mind that, the mainstream media has also been more open in pushing the idea that this is something that we might have to deal with soon. So whether it's real or fabled, I think they have more rabbits to pull out of the hat. And I think we have a long way to go. I would think several decades of some of these programs coming to fruition to get it exactly where they want it. And, when I'm looking at, I don't know if you noticed that the portrait of the king has been out, and, all kinds of people have flipped it, and it really looks demonic, and the whole coloring of it's demonic. And you know that this guy's from one of the elite families that go back to Dracula, that go back to the Prophet Muhammad, from different lineages. These guys think that they rule the world. And keep in mind, this is the guy with probably one of the biggest amounts of gold in the world. So if you can take all of the gold out of the system and all of the precious metals out of the system, you can cripple certain nations, certain people, certain ways of life. And it makes sense to me that China would be telling people to buy a little bit of gold, because each little bit of gold, guess what? It's not in the central banker's hands, and therefore they can't manipulate its value because they don't have control over it. It's like the diamond trade. I'm sure there's more diamonds than the ones out there for sale, and they would sit on those so they can control the market. And that's been, the big case with a lot of things. They do it with oil. And isn't it ironic that right when we're coming into a time that countries might mess with the supply of oil or the price of oil, that our leaders over here thought it was a good idea to drain our national strategic reserve and then not replace it. So it seems that the plans are for us to fail here. So you better be taking care of yourself, because no one else is going to help you. No one else is going to take care of you unless you've already connected with other people and made counter culture civilizations, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it's going to be different for each person in each different place. So as you were talking there, I was looking at farmers, farmers in bad positions, not a good position. And at the same time, what are they talking about with the bank failures that are coming? I mean, you look at the Economist magazine, the new economic order, they give you the free PDF, at least for the beginning of it. It's out there to try to pre-program your mind that it's already a done deal, that the new system's coming, there's nothing you can do about it. They want to start to fragment, yet save parts of the old by using World Trade Organization, but they want to fragment it into a new system of trade. And, they go through this thing from the 1930s and how, tariffs caused America's woes in the 1930s and the Depression, and it dropped 40% in just 2 years because of tariffs. Like they're setting your mind for this. Gradually and suddenly. Broadcasting, it says if it's a SOS signal or some sort of Morse code, middle-income countries like India and Indonesia are now going to be the beneficiaries. Places like Britain and South Korea, not so much. And then what do I find here? A related article. Farmers warn food aisles, these are British farmers, will soon be empty because of crushing conditions. Like I say, each place is going to be slightly different. Not everything is going to go to zero, never has, never will. Like you referenced there, these royal families, how much gold do they really have? And they could also, they themselves are the bedrock and some of the pillars of the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central bank to the central banks. That wealth, you might call it Templar gold. You could call it Solomon's treasure. I don't care what era of history when people owned millions of tons of what you today, and in terms of almost all gold on the planet was in their hands. This was and is the beginnings of what we understand today as the Bank for International Settlements. The untouchable, unnamed royal families that have been in control for 6,000 years, these same. They're going to continue to shift around to slowly draw wealth away. By collapsing too quickly, well, there's a lot of, say, money left on the table. You would never do that. This is a controlled demolition. I'm just having the question of how many times has this been done before? From the Roman Empire, Greek, Sumerians, go further back, or come to the present. I mean, which chapters of history are we privy to read the truth about? When those collapses have come in and come on, were they natural, or was this the same exact thing we're experiencing today with the same controllers just 2,000 years ago? Copy, rinse, repeat. But I digress to the farmers here in England or the UK. UK is facing dire food shortages, forcing prices to skyrocket, and experts say this is only the beginning. Okay, well, you can see some of these countries are earmarked, like I say, liquidated. They're in liquidation proceedings. They're going to steal all the wealth the fastest from these nations. We start to see now Australia, UK. Where else is a place that's quickly disappearing and is just runaway inflation with food, and everything in the entire life is becoming so expensive that it's becoming not even affordable to live a normal life, even with the basics. New Zealand would be another one. Hey, there's a trend there, isn't there? We're starting to look at these westernized nations. Why is it that the Western nations are being singled out? When you look over at places like China, bountiful growth. Not as much as they want at regular 8%, which they always try to achieve 8% growth. But compared to anything that we're seeing back here, it's astounding. So why are coffee prices, beer prices, wine prices, every possible thing that you can purchase price going up in terms of, I thought the dollar was the strongest thing on the block. Well, if that's the case, then it should have kept its value and we shouldn't be experiencing this inflation at all. If it's the number one King Kong on the planet, then we should have the most stable currency. Unless it's being inflated away on purpose. See, that's what I don't get is all these articles that I read, they're talking about a massive shift from one system to another, but in the interim here, the dollar will reign supreme during this time until it doesn't. Just even taking that into context, why is there so much inflation? Why is life becoming so unaffordable for many? Why did my insurance premiums raise 30% when I've never had a claim? I talked to the agent, well, the materials are more expensive. If they have to make a claim, it's going to be more expensive. We should have decreasing prices here. With all those people using the $70 trillion around the world, 70 trillion. And King Kong on the block, strength of the dollar, that means some of these things make no sense unless you look at it with a different set of lenses. And if you look at central banks pushing in the inflation rate to try to strip wealth, well, they've done that since 1913 here in America. Our Western Five Eyes nations, or the Western aligned bloc, is the one that seems to be being milked at the moment. Now look at it as, all right, it's transference. So what happened when these Western nations started to come together, say circa 1100? What we see today in our world really began around 1100 AD. That consolidation of wealth and power yet again into, it's almost as if the Roman era had straggled through that time. And a lot of people say that the timelines are not exactly true. They're off by several hundred, if not 1,000 years, depending on who you would listen to. But that would make sense if there was lost time somewhere, 500 or 1,000 years of lost time. It would go from the Roman era straight up into the reconsolidation, the reconfiguration of what we consider the Templar era. Like that would make more sense than anything if that skip of time was right there. Roman era collapses. Suddenly, even if it was 500 years, and at 535 AD, and then boom, then suddenly the Templar riches come out and we reset the world, and then the money flowed into a set of different hands in different nations and different continents for this new system. Now, it seems like it's just being pulled out and taken over to the same old places that it originated from the last cycle. As you go down to Mali, they're finding these canals down there. I'm looking at these vast ancient cities, and I'm not really a Microsoft news person, but somebody sent me this link here today. Archaeologists use Google Earth to help find 3,000 square miles of prehistoric settlements from a newfound civilization in Central Europe. I'm like, wait a second here. You found what? The ancient society was less centrally located than its predecessor. Okay, so it fractionalized and must have had a bunch of land to go out and resettle then, hadn't it? New study found evidence of a previously unknown network of societies living in Central Europe in the late Bronze Age. So again, I thought our history was clear as day, mapped out. And here we are finding how many square miles of loosely coagulated ruins and a civilization 3,000 years prior. Wait a minute.
This is Mysteries in the Histories. A mysterious manuscript, roughly 250-page book written in an entirely unknown language and writing system. It's been carbon dated back to the 1400s and includes illustrations of plants that don't resemble any known species, believed to have been intended as a medical text. It's named for the Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. This is the mystery of the Voynich manuscript. Since its discovery in 1912, the 15th century Voynich manuscript has been a strange, mysterious cult phenomenon captivating the minds of many. Its first confirmed owner was Georg Barisch from 1585 to 1662, an alchemist from Prague who discovered it in his library. Barisch tried to investigate the manuscript's origins to no avail. The manuscript, full of handwriting in an unknown language, zodiac symbols, naked women and strange objects like unknown plants, seemed to be from another time or even another world. For centuries, this book repeatedly changed hands. When it was purchased by Voynich, who posited that it was authored by Albertus Magnus, an alchemist, or Roger Bacon, an early scientist. People believed that Voynich himself fabricated the manuscript, although that theory wouldn't explain the carbon dating of the paper and ink to the 15th century. The book itself bears no indication of its authors, about 6 inches by 9 inches and around 232 pages decorated, not unlike others in the illuminated age. Wrapped in vellum, with vellum pages, the manuscript features 116 folded folios bound in 18 bundles. The binding of the book is old and busted, though it is not original to the text. Many of the pages are fold-outs, some are missing. Inside the tome are innumerable lines of looping text, inked in iron gall in a medium typical of the Middle Ages, scribbled in a strange, unfamiliar language and a strange, unfamiliar script, incomprehensible, causing Voynich to conclude that the tome was written in code. Alongside the text, unknown if important or decorative, there is an abundance of illustrations and pictorial art. Composed of inks and pigments in tones and color palettes common to the 1400s, these illustrations seem to split the manuscript into 4 separate sections, including sections about botany, astronomy and astrology, balneology, the science of the therapeutic use of baths, and pharmacology, as well as a 5th and final section, with blocks of text separated by stars. The first and largest section of the manuscript is the botany section that contains detailed drawings of plants as if from another world or a lost continent, plants no one can identify and no one has ever seen before. The astronomy and astrology section has illustrations of the stars, the sun and the moon alongside several zodiac signs. Immersed in strange, shared baths, female figures frolic through the pages of the text's balneological section, while the pharmaceutical section is filled with what appears to be medicinal plants, indicated by the inclusion of medicinal bottles throughout this fantastical illustration. Like Voynich, many modern scholars suspect that the manuscript's text is a ciphered form of a familiar language, with their theories of the tome's latent linguistics flitting from Latin to Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs and Toltecs of Mexico. Others say that the text is an artificial language or strange shorthand, and others still see the text as meaningless scribbles. The theories of the tome are, thus, all over the place, with no one opinion snagging widespread support. The Voynich manuscript continues to mystify medievalists and confuse cryptologists centuries after its supposed creation. it remains as impenetrable and inexplicable as ever. But is this truly one of the mysteries in the histories? A book on female maintenance? Maybe. Want to see the full episode? Sign up for the show notes and the link will be in next week's email.
Ransom Godwin at Mountain High Time is locked in a basement writing new episodes to keep your addiction to mysteries facilitated.
Signing up for the show notes, you get behind-the-scenes thoughts and points we sometimes can't relay over social media platforms. Brought to you by ITM Trading. ITM Trading has spent the last 28-plus years developing a team of expert researchers and gold and silver analysts to make this possible. Simply put, we build strategies which are historically proven to protect your wealth and assets through any economic downturn. 866-834-1422. That's 866-834-1422.
Go, wait a second, they were far, far, far more advanced, or something was very different than they've told us previously in terms of waterworks, technology, interconnectivity, propulsion, amongst others. I don't know, I was going somewhere with the point, but welcome back. Second hour, Mini Ice Age Conversations right here. Dave DuByne, Ransom Godwin, taking you through hour 2. Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us speak here. It seems that the censorship laws are really starting to take hold across many a nation on the planet right now. Those all went live on May 1st, and it doesn't take but a quick 2 weeks, and people are being arrested left, right, and center because of their thoughts and ideas, people being pulled aside. You can't think that way. You're not allowed to think that way. You can only think this way. So the conversation shall continue here on Revolution Radio, and I hope you can join us every single week along with other hosts. So consider a donation right here, running costs, production costs, keeping the station on air, all live so we can compare notes and ideas. I mean, how much more change can we have before you really start to point at the actual cause of the problems? And this is what I'm seeing too. It doesn't matter if it was Occupy Wall Street where they started to point fingers at the correct people. And once they did, you're not allowed to protest anymore. We saw the same thing in Canada. As soon as they started to occupy the city center, going, hey, you all politicians and your central banks, you're all the cause of our problems. Now here, I'm going to make a bold prediction because I want to start us off in Ransom. I want to see what you think. I'm going to drop you back into 2019. I know it seems like a super long time ago. It really does. But at that time, remember, they were protesting around the world central banks. There were 22 protests going on in 22 different capital cities against central banks in the nations where they were having very high inflation in 22 countries around the world. They figured it out. They all started pointing the fingers. They all started protesting at the same exact vestige or entity that was single problem for every single nation on the planet in unison. And then they're like, no, you can't protest. And then suddenly what happens in 2020? We get a visit from the spike protein. And then everything stopped on a dime. You couldn't go outside and there's no more protests. And nobody's really protesting central banks any longer, are they? But what are they protesting in unison now? We start to see across the planet multiple protests, people pointing fingers as they were at the central banks earlier. In unison across the planet in almost every nation, now there are protests all supporting the same groups of people and narratives. So I would ask the question to you, Ransom, do you think there's going to be something else in the woodwork coming along here that will also stop all these protests? But you got to remember, it's only a certain demographic that is protesting. The thing about the central bank's protest in 2019, it was everybody from the moms pushing their kids in strollers all the way up to the 75-year-old man or woman with their retirement savings being stolen, and everybody in between. Like the countries would just stop. We're like, we're not working. You guys are stealing our money. We're not going to work. You guys, and they would protest every single day. It went on for months, plural. But this is a little bit different. But I'm just curious, when will be that final percentage rollover where enough people are protesting all in unison, all on the same laser niche that it's causing a problem enough where they're going to have to start to reset the world again under some guise of something else to make everybody get off the street and stop protesting. Because it seems when we come to this point, when people really find the real culprits for whatever it is, it doesn't matter, that you suddenly lose your rights to be able to protest. Canadians, they saw what's happening. We're next. So anyway, Ransom, welcome back. Second hour.
I have a weird theory about all the protests. It seems to me that around that time you're speaking, so you remember all the way back when you had Occupy Wall Street and all of that stuff, right? It seemed to be at the beginning an organic grassroots protest against the elite. Well, that got co-opted very quickly, and the government also baited out all the people that might not like that one world banking system, so to speak. Later, we had other protests for other things, and they continually amped up and allowed protests to get out of control, all the way up until some of their own little plots and plans, in my opinion, that they wanted to use to frame a narrative. So they allowed certain peoples to get violent, destroy stuff, like $2 billion worth of stuff recently. Lots of protests. And then different groups started protesting, right? These aren't all the same type of groups, despite being treated, a certain way by government. So you have the Greenies. You have the anti-colony movement, I guess you'll call it, the people that like to call everything racist and everybody racist. Then you have the farmers' protest about unfair treatment by governments, regulations, and stuff. They set these two groups against each other in the long term, but then sometimes, people from both sides of that realize, hey, wait a minute, those people are kind of saying some of the same things we're saying. But behind the scenes, they're getting paid for and pushed by the very top. Now, why would they do that? So there's a couple things in play, in my opinion. First off, they're getting people used to having the feeling that they could lash out and claim entitlement. That's number one. So more and more excessive use of protest into the violent spectrum of it. And that's okay. Now, if you're protesting for certain things which are pointing the strings out, you might get, kind of snuffed down or a police action against you, like debanking you or actually, physical force on the street. But in either case, you have all of these different various reasons and groups being pushed to protest for one reason or another, despite whether they're controlled opposition or not controlled, or maybe both sides are controlled for a certain outcome. But what you do have is a bunch of people now that have lived through a time period where it's okay to protest if it's the right thing, and maybe even get violent if it's the right thing. Now, what happens when those same people and those same groups are now hungry? They're starving. They actually have a reason to be out there protesting, and they have, a real physical need to get out there and protest. Well, they've already trained them, so to speak, to go ahead and be violent. Take what you want. Do what you need to do, because the people at the top that are funding this destabilization of civilization are okay. They're fine at the top. They're not going to hurt if, the civilian sector burns down. They already have this accumulated wealth, and I keep going back to this thing. Everybody's still kind of behind the times on the trip that the elite push these programs for the reason of money. But they don't, because they print the money. They decide how much the money's worth. They decide which money you're going to use. They decide how much you need the money by deciding how much things are going to cost via different mechanisms, whether it's war, regulations, or, collapsing or propping up economies around the world. So they have all of these tools to motivate people to do things for money. But at the top, they already own all the best islands. They have property rights above any rights that you're going to have. Think about the royal family there. They just own a bunch of stuff. They have all the gold for their nation. It's a state secret how much it is they're stockpiling. Do you think their descendants are going to have trouble being in charge through any kind of economic reset? The answer is no. And the same goes for all of the groups that now control the continuity of government programs. So that this would be DARPA, the military industrial complex, the people that actually run the foods, because we all know it's a pyramid of only a handful of corporations that have smaller corporations that end up feeding you all of the food that you get through different choices you think you're making at the store, not realizing that the same people are selling you all the same brands. So it's the same group of people that run everything. We've got to the point where there's so much control that no one will ever know who's actually pulling the strings at this point. It's become a monster on its own. And now they're realizing that in order to have total control, they have to totally control. And the only way to do that is through death and food, which equals life. And if they can control that, they control everything. So they don't need to really control the money as much as they do the food, but they control your need for money, thinking that's the salvation you need to eat, when in reality, the earth provides everything everyone needs in abundance and in perpetuality. So it would continue to feed us. And they don't want you to think in those terms. They want you to think in terms of you need this money that they so happen to have a supply of, and they so happen to decide how much it's going to be worth or not worth. And not only that, but who gets it and who doesn't get it. And, you know, throughout the centuries, this has worked for them on a grand scheme. However, people slip through the cracks. People are able to find niches to manipulate those monetary systems and gain their own power. And that happened in the U.S. That's what happened when, you know, everybody started inventing and creating companies. And we fast forward to the future where all of that wealth and all of those buildup of different franchises and stuff have basically been, solidified into a few companies that actually run everything. So although there was a plethora of different people with businesses creating middle class, nowadays it's less so much that and more the same few 1% of the 1% own everything and decide what the regulations are going to be. They decide which countries will go to war. And in the end, they decide who gets to eat and who doesn't. And they do this through your perception of needing the money. Now, it's not just a perception, because most of us are in a predicament where we physically and actually need the money right now, because we're still taking part in the civilization setup that's we're using right now. But when that collapses, what do you do then? What's your paper money going to do then? It's not going to do anything. And the paper that says that you own this or that, guess what? Those mobs of protesters, they become mobs of rapists and hungry people that are eating the substance out of anyone that has it still. And I don't mean rapist in a sexual way. I mean rapist in the way that they will devour what there is to devour across the land. Not only because they think it's a necessity, but they have the same mentality that you do, and that is, I want to live and I want to survive. The problem is they've been, pushed into a different frame of thinking, setting them up over decades incrementally, and to the point that the destabilization actually is seen on the streets. And that's what we're talking about, is mass protest, mass rioting, flash mobs, theft, murder, all the stuff that you can think of. And that's going to happen in the Western world. The reason we know that is because it's already happening. And speaking of which, I wanted to ask your opinion on something. Let me see if I got the right page up here. It's the 10 most dangerous states here. And there's something ironic, like a pattern recognition that I latched onto here. If I could find it, here it is. All of the states I noticed are the states that you might want to retreat in and buy some land and be out in a remote part. So let's look at the 10 most dangerous states in America, and I'll go through them really fast so you can respond. So number 10 is Missouri. All right, so you would think about that. It's a lot of backwoods, a lot of country. California, massive state, lots of remote places, lots of country, lots of wilderness. Also, number 9 for violence. And then we go up, and it's states you would think, of, if I, wanted to grab my go bag and go out there, I'd go there. These are those places. Oregon, violent crime rate skyrockets there, number 8. And what's funny is because these are the places you would think wouldn't really have that, but I know it's the city, but think about that. So this is kind of showing you a pattern in each one of these states where there's remote living and food on the landscape and countryside and wilderness and the ability to kind of push out away from the matrix. You also have these massive cities that have become centers of crime. So think about that when you think about the scenario of running out of resources. Okay, let's move on from Alaska being number 7 to number 6, which is Tennessee. Number 6.
No.
Yeah. Number 5, Washington State, another state, along with Tennessee, that has lots of countryside, lots of resources, lots of ability to grow food, to farm food, ranch, all of these things. Number 4, Arkansas. Used to live there. Lots of countryside, lots of resources, lots of chicken farms, hog farms, and ranches, dairy farms, etc. Plus, they grow a lot of produce there. So these are food centers on top of wilderness centers that could give you the alternative of being away from kind of the matrix or the cities crumbling. Let's move on to number 3. Colorado, what's up there? Oppenheimer Ranch there, up there in the Rocky Mountains where it's almost all wilderness, but they have a fertile grow zone right in the middle of the state that's like a protected grow zone from the elements that's been the same for millions of years, and they can grow, and there's lots of animals to eat, elk, deer, etc., etc. Another great place to bug out to, right? You would think. Louisiana, maybe, this is in the middle of bugging out too, but again, there's lots of remote wilderness and lots of ability to grow food there. Lots of food, lots of farmers, lots of dairy farms, all kinds of stuff, you name it. Number 1, New Mexico, where I live, with a violent crime rate of 780 per 100,000. So this is funny. These are the states with the most remote locations that you would want to bug out to. I was surprised not to see Arizona on the list, judging by the pattern there. So what do you think about that?
Dude, I've been around Tennessee a fair bit just because, attending conferences or, going to check out somebody's farm, all the way from Eastern Tennessee to Central. I can't say I haven't been over in Memphis very much, but anywhere, an hour and a half east of Memphis, maybe an hour west of Nashville, north, all the way down to, like you say, to the Arkansas border, that Little Rock, going across there, over on the river and swinging around. Tennessee is very safe. I mean, I wouldn't go driving in Memphis at midnight and just take a random turn off of a highway, but almost any other town, and you have to be causing trouble to get in trouble. Nobody's going to, that makes no sense. It's some of the safest places. People work together. There's still morals and ethics.
Right. That's why, David, you nailed it right there. I mean, I didn't mean to intersect there, but think about this. Those are all the places, like I said, with the remote wilderness, farming. You got polite people, nice people out in the country areas, the rural areas.
Water too. Don't forget the water. Plentiful fresh water coming off the mountains, aquifers, and everything.
Ozarks, Rocky Mountains. That's the places that the Democrat. You could say what you want about the parties, but those are the places with the cities like Denver, Portland, Seattle, Albuquerque, and Memphis. And you nailed it. They are purposely doing that, and those people will spread out in those areas to try to destabilize it.
Well, I'm going to say something here. If something really were to happen and say power to go out, somebody from Memphis is not going to reach way out here in the Appalachian Mountains in East Tennessee. The chances of that would be so remote that they'd even be able to travel that far, 6 hours across the state. That crime zone over in Memphis, well-known area, as soon as you get out of that zone, the rest of the state, like 99% of the state, is what you would consider extremely safe. You break down, there's going to be like 10 people stop and ask you if they can help you fix your car. These are the kind of places where I live in Tennessee. If you have a problem, people help. Neighbors help each other. Even if you don't know the person, you see them broken down, you're going to ask, hey, can I help? It's just that there must be a narrative behind that, because you did find the key element. Think about what's in every one of those states. There's already food production going on. And those are the states that are going to tell the government when they come along with their bird flu thing that I need to cull your chickens, your backyard flock. Everybody's going to say no. I don't know how much inroads they're going to be, because I've seen a couple new maps as of late where they're talking about how many chickens there are. And these maps don't even reflect reality. They got one set of maps that's showing like half of the counties in America have some contagious bird flu thing in the birds. And then you look at other maps and they're like, oh, reported thing. And there's only like 27 across the entire United States and just mainly Ohio and Illinois. These are the places that are already producing food. Cattle, like you say, pig, tons of birds, a lot of self-sufficiency minded people. Again, that access to fresh water, aquifers, people willing to work together, people very much wanting to get and stay in a family ecosystem and get things back to normal. Because another thing that I've noticed is the majority of people are realizing that something's tremendously wrong at the moment. Like even as of a few months ago, yeah, it was true, it was wrong, yeah, okay, but now it's kind of rolled over. I can't explain to you what it was or what event, I don't know. But I'm going to say since the beginning of the year until now, finally, something is triggered and awakened people so much that they look at the reality around them and go, something's terribly wrong. We got to shift this back. And I can't think of it in my head like one. It had to be a set of events, not a single one event that did it. But for some reason, the awareness of we got to turn the ship back is all encompassing now. And you know where it is mainly located in those same states that you're talking about. People have seen that we need to go back to an older way of life, an older way of common sense, an older system of working together as not only people, but economies. The Great Awakening is happening, and it's mainly in those same states you're talking about. And the difference is, instead of just sitting and talking about it, a lot of people are starting to take action in these same states to do something about it. Predominantly getting their freedom cells together, starting to grow food, all these conversations, community gardens are popping up. They're getting others to connect in case there does need to be some trade to go on, that they've already had these relationships established and built. So if something does happen, it seems that there's like a movement of electricity from one community to another to know others. And it will not fall apart down here in those same states you referenced. If it were to go, it would go for a few months only badly, and they would pick themselves up in those same states you mentioned, and they would dust it off and be like, we're not going to live like that. That system was a failure. We're not going to do it again. Don't try to bring it back here again, and we're going to start like it was. Let's bring it back to Leave It to Beaver, dude. Rewind the clock. That is the direction all those states you referenced. I mean, selectively in California, some areas, Oregon as well. But if you're talking about the Southeast U.S., I can just say the general person is just tired of the world they're living in terms of the degeneracy, the lack of common knowledge, or what you consider common sense, this false dichotomy of narrative where what you know is truth is now considered something you're not even allowed to talk about. And the reality of something that is so bent and twisted 180 degrees from real world, you can't discuss without having your job possibly affected, your life being ruined. You're never allowed to work again because of things you've said or conversations just of common sense that you would like to speak about. That's the world in the Southeast U.S. People are so tired of it. You have no idea. If there's any way to rip free and break free of this grid of madness, they will happily do that and replace a system in a fifth of an eighth of a second. But that's the thing, Ransom. It's all the states you mentioned there, at least in the Southeast U.S. Like you could probably talk a little bit better about where you're at in California and Oregon, but I could see why they wrote that article. Don't move down here, because the more people that move with your mind frame is just a larger force to contend with. They're going to try to scare you away from these states. Be very afraid.
Actually, I don't really think that the threat will come from the population of those cities, at least not in any meaningful way, like you're saying, because they're going to have their own issues in the cities dealing with themselves. Now, if there was a major problem with food per se, there's going to be millions of people in these city centers. You got Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis. Over here, you got Albuquerque. There's Portland and Seattle, and you could go on for California, L.A., San Francisco, Sacramento. These are all places that have huge million cities. I mean, millions of people in each cities. Denver and Shreveport and New Orleans, all of this stuff, but the government may decide that, because things are breaking out of control in those places, that they need to take more control of those areas, which would give them a foothold in each one of those states that they may want to, free. We'll put it that way at first. They are going to come to help to free and get the cities in check. But, if there's real problems, they might just go out to the farms and tell them, well, we're going to need, a little bit of food. You're going to have to produce directly for the government because we have this situation going on. And it's kind of like what we were talking about, the regulations about the cement and stuff, right? You got cement pads. Well, that's just another excuse for government entities to gain entry. It's like, knocking on the door to your house and then asking you a question about something inside and asking if they can come in. Well, if you don't do that,
absolutely not. Without a warrant, don't even ask. No warrant, right. No entry. Get off my porch.
Right, exactly.
Come back when you have a warrant.
Exactly. So, then we'll have to make exigent circumstances so we can go in. Well, we know this is happening.
Well, what is that? You have to voice that exigent circumstance. I mean, you can't just stand there and say, if you have a warrant here, I will hold my hands up next to my window, break the door down and break the window down if you have a warrant to come in. Otherwise, you got nothing.
Right.
And your exigent circumstance, you can kiss my grits.
Well, I was just using that as an example because it does happen and they do gain entry into people's homes for felonious reasons. All the time, but it would be that on a bigger scale with the government. Oh, you got cement pads. We need to, come over here and see if you're the source of the contamination that's causing this epidemic of flu or whatever. Oh, you got chickens out on a pad. It's just millions of excuses. But think about a major one: collapse of city centers where you got millions of people. Then you would have to have the government take control of that area, and it would give them a foothold into those states exactly for the reason that you're saying. Those are the same areas people would say, GTFA or, get on out of here, right? Those are the same places. And unfortunately, those same states are all leftist states now, except for maybe Tennessee, not counting Tennessee, but they're all going in that direction where the government of that state is definitely not representing the majority of the state or the people that live in that state or even the lifestyle that they live in that state. People always think about California as those main cities of LA and San Francisco, San Diego, but they forget there's millions upon millions of people living in rural areas that are doing farming, ranching, and all kinds of other things. And like we said, every other one of those states that they're now telling you it may be true, but there may be some other reasons why that's happening. And one of those is the influx of methamphetamine and fentanyl into all of those same states, but only in the cities, which bleeds out to the rural areas, the smaller farm towns, which makes what? More criminals even out in the rural areas. And Arkansas would be a good example of that because I did live in the country there and did a lot of country jobs and different stuff. And one thing that I found out is, guess what? A lot of people are on them drugs, like a lot of people out there robbing and stealing out in rural areas, despite the risk of losing their head from the property owners. So, maybe those people wouldn't be such a problem, but millions more that just want, or, they've been brainwashed into thinking that they deserve it just for being there, and somehow it's being held from them, which will be exactly it's going on right now, and you can see it in a large scale. Matter of fact, I just watched a pretty funny movie, and despite it being funny, I could see the predictive programming in there to tell you to not like specific people, and those specific people happen to be 70% of the population of this country and like half of the population of the Western countries as a whole, and include the farmers, ranchers, and the people that produce food. And they're trying to a good example of this is in the 20s. They were having a lot of problems in the Appalachians. There was a major campaign to make people that lived in Appalachia look like they were low intelligence, or, dumb people, rednecks, hillbillies. And they even put that into the cartoons, Bugs Bunny and all of these other things. If you look and you go back in retrospect, you see they were using the same tactics back then to destroy certain areas to make sure that they didn't have any wealth or prosperity. And they're doing that on a massive scale now with the Western world. So I don't know where it goes from now, except for war, famine, and then the Reconstruction, which we all know that the powers that be that are in power now will be the same ones that are benefiting off the Reconstruction.
Yeah, they did a full thing on that to try to, that's when you said that in the 1920s. At the same time, they were trying to push electricity lines up through the mountains here, and everybody was saying no. Because eminent domain laws hadn't really tested the courts too much in their infancy of when this started. You still had definitely land rights in the 1920s in America. But they were trying to push through all these new, social works projects and electricity into the mountains to get faster sawmilling equipment in there so they could deforest even faster and push out lumber, and bring in a bunch of small gauge rails, to connect little small towns together so they could bring out whatever had been pillaged from the natural environment. Back then, there was no environmental laws. So whatever you scraped, blasted, or, got together, they wanted it out on a small gauge rail. So Popcorn Sutton, one of the most famous moonshiners from the area here, they try to portray everybody as, everybody's just drinking moonshine up in the hills. Everybody's barefoot, marrying your cousins. They did try to do that whole PR thing to get people. So if anything were to happen, like they took their land, it was just a bunch of them people, painting them as if they were just barely a step away from a caveman. Living in log huts, they scraped together and axed up their own, log cabin like Abe Lincoln. But Abe was, 80 years ago, but these people are still living the same way as Abe Lincoln back in the 1880s or something, 1860s. They try to portray it as, this, I don't care what era it was. Abraham Lincoln, after he was assassinated, that old log cabin thing kept sticking around forever. So you're talking 80 years after that. Well, he's still living like they're in the Abe Lincoln days, and they kept trying to paint people like that because they were nearly self-sufficient. They didn't want their supermarkets. They didn't need them. They didn't want the electricity. They didn't need it, although it would make life easier. But in the reality of it, they were so totally self-sufficient, even from making their own motor fuels with this newfangled thing called a car, automobile. They didn't need it. That was forced upon them. And then there was a bevy of laws that made that style of life illegal for a lot of people. Or you can't dam up the river. You can't dam up the creeks. You can't make the moonshine. You can't make motor fuels. You can't make biodiesel. And it was just one thing after another. Well, then they had to start paying revenuers. They had to pay the taxes. Then this whole property tax thing came up. And if you're living self-sufficient and you're not trading in money, the system that was set up to get you hooked in, just like you said, they make a money supply. They weren't on the money supply. They were on the gold and silver supply, which they, at that time, there was no such thing as, the property tax was new. You got to think about that. Property tax was a new thing. Wind back the clock there when there was almost no income tax, and it was only if you actually made money on a capital gain. It wasn't for labor back at that point. Now, they didn't even ratify that thing until the 20s. This is a time era gone where people that were self-sufficient and trading with communities. So think about the Amish across all of Appalachia, where they produced extra. They were able to trade with the outside world and get those things called silver coins from the outside world, but otherwise, they were already making so much in trading that they didn't need those silver coins to get the things they needed. They could trade the food they produced. They could trade the finished products of food that they produced. They were living in an ecosystem outside what we considered monetary commerce. And that could not, there was millions of people doing it. That cannot be any longer. They have to be on the system. Like Rockefeller and that oil thing coming in, don't, heaven forbid, you use an electric car back in the 1880s. You got to put a meter on it. And all those moonshiners double refining and triple refining down to their motor fuels. You can't have that either. So all those laws come in, and you got to get on the Rockefeller pump at the gas station. You can't create your own motor fuel from corn, ethanol. That's the craziest thing is those moonshiners were using corn to make ethanol, to make the motor fuel. Yet moonshining became illegal, and then what were they doing? Only the government mandated factories could produce the ethanol, which is the same grain alcohol that the moonshiners were producing. And now go buy it at a pump from a Rockefeller station. And it just goes on. Reefer madness, that whole thing about the million oodles of products that could be made from the hemp plants. It's been 100 years, more than 100 years. And then finally, we're starting to allow to use the plant after 100 years. So you can just see this demonization. And that was that whole campaign of demonization from the 20s with the Appalachian folks all the way through the reefer madness era. Like, think about how much they swooped out of the society and took people and put them back on a system again and removed ways for people to stay independent and trade amongst their own communities just in the 1920s and 30s alone. They took 20% of American population off of self-sufficiency at different levels and put them all onto a metered system and then drove them into a world war where after the victory gardens were finished, you were fully back into the supermarkets, and almost all self-sufficiency was removed by the 1960s. Look at that transition from the 1920s to the 60s. 40 years of eras gone, and then suddenly we're back in the system. Now, we've just continually just dove down on the deep end on that, getting onto the system. Because for the majority of my life, there were supermarkets. It's only this newest homesteading thing. I think COVID drove home a lot of people. You need to get self-sufficient. But prior to that, and prior to all these problems in, say, 2019 with the banking collapse and the COVID coming in, there weren't as many people even getting into homesteading or growing their own food back then, even 5 years ago. It's exponentially more now because of these global events that occurred. So taking everybody from the 1950s fully into a metered system of life, from everything from your electricity all the way down to the food that you got, and you only got it at the supermarket. I mean, yeah, maybe your grandpa grew some maters or something like that. Maybe the uncle threw in a tater plot, something. But otherwise, almost everything was bought from the supermarket, like 99%. So see how everything was narrativized to reverse. Now, what's the narrative today? That's my next question, I guess. Well, where do you see it moving to? So the broadcast of the 1920s was, these people are so backwards. Dude, they're living like they're living in the 1860s in today's 1920s world. OMG. We need to get them into the modern world. We need to take this away. We need to control that. So where's the messaging moving us to now, Ransom? I guess I'm living in a log cabin. Well, actually, I'm living in a log cabin, but
Right.
I do live in a log cabin out in the East Tennessee mountains.
I was kind of thinking,
it's a nice cabin, though.
What's the end result? Like, how far will they let it go? Like, if you're sitting back as an elite and this is part of your plan, Not judging from the past, because like it's hard to know how many millions and millions, tens of millions of people died in World War II. You have the people that died in conflicts, and then you had people that died in ethnic cleansing. You had like 12 million people right shortly after the war getting killed in various different countries because they spoke the wrong language. And then you had over in China, they don't even count, each phase of that all together. It's probably like 150 million if you count the Great Leap Forward and, years of executions. And then that's not even, talking about just the amount of people that died in the actual cultural revolution part. So we're talking upwards of 150, and then you got over in Russia, they killing 80 million people, and then the next guy comes in, he kills his tens of millions of people. And people forget how many people actually disappeared from the planet. And there was a lot of starvation as the main tool to make that happen. Not everybody got a bullet. Not everybody got executed. A lot of people just died because they didn't have anything to eat. Now, why do I bring that up? I've been doing a lot of genetic research as far as my own history, and I can tell you for sure that at least my ancestry, I can go back to ancestors that were eating other people in like the hunter-gatherer populations in the UK. They were definitely eating each other. So at different times, people, for whatever reason, were eating each other, but I would imagine that the main factor in all of these cases is some kind of food shortage for the population that exists. Even though, like different people around the world may still practice cannibalism, or their people may have done that recently, it's not like the rest of humanity hasn't taken part of that at one point or another. That kind of makes you wonder, what that did to our genes. But anyway, I digress. Here's one. A man takes bite out of a crime fighter. He took, he bit a piece off of him. And I've been seeing a lot of this, like all over the place, people getting busted for eating people. And they're putting out, this is about, I'm going to say the 10th article that I've seen this week from different outlets talking about inside the world of the last cannibal tribes. Now, you got to keep in mind that this is at a current time where 2% of your sausage and hot dog products in the U.S. contains traces of up to 2% human DNA from who knows what source that came from. And then you got, the idea of starvation. How far will it go in those cities before intervention takes place, right? So if you have continuity of government programs and you have deals amongst elite in the nation states that are remaining today, you got to wonder how far are they willing to push it? Like, is there a point, a red line? They go, okay, that's enough killing, that's enough depopulation, that's enough. People are eating people, so we might want to roll that back. I don't know how far it's going to go, but they definitely want to keep track of everybody as it goes down, like a giant experiment. Think about all the things that are taking place simultaneously. So we got the potential for another world conflict, which includes, like I said before, tens of millions of people dying from direct conflict related deaths. And then you have additional hundreds of millions of people that generally die from starvation, bad nutrition, and just situation that's been created. At the same time, though, you have the most technologic surveillance state ever invented, as far as we know. And we have recognition at every point. And here's one that this article that I'm talking about. After a loss in the FISA, privacy-minded senators find new target. They're going after recognition at the airports. But let me tell you, they're going to lose because the system is already set up. And people don't believe in the elections here. What happens when, they start blaming one guy or another guy, or one party or another party? Or, to circle it back to what we were talking about, what if you tell the people in these cities that the reason that you're hungry is because those farmers and those truckers out there were protesting and they weren't making the food like they were supposed to, and they're all a bunch of bigots and racist, and they don't want to feed you, so they have what you need out there. They have it. Could that happen? Well, let's ask the Chinese. Did that happen? Absolutely, it happened. And guess what happens to all of those millions of people that survive the cleansing that happens after that. They get put in work camps. The people that institute the revolution will be the new workers in the following regime, right? Because that's just exactly what happened in China. Most of the people that brought you the Cultural Revolution either got killed afterwards or they got put in work camps for decades, to help out. Didn't end too well for them. And I don't think it'll end too well for the Western world with what I call capitulators, which are the people in each country that are helping dissolve the situation that they have. I'm not totally saying that we absolutely have to have nation states as a part of human existence here, but at this point, those are the last firewalls to tyranny that we have on the earth, and those are dissolving rapidly with world government. And on both sides of this potential conflict, which is basically Russia, China, its allies against the United States, NATO, and its allies, they are going to force some kind of resolution. And guess what? All of the top people, they don't care because they're still going to be there at the end of it. And that's why I think people just don't get that concept, especially in Europe. I feel like they're going to punish Europe really bad this time, but I don't think they'll be alone. The United States has been letting in so many people that we have factions from every area of the world. So whichever way the geopolitical environment goes in Europe, there will be the same things happening in the U.S. sponsored by the same people. That's where I see it's going.
Yeah, I'm wondering what the time lag on that is. Events in Europe before they transition to events in the United States. The farmers to blame. Well, they did the same thing in the Ukraine back in the 1930s. Those pesky farmers, they got so rich with their wheat exports. That's the reason the rest of the country's so poor. So greedy farmers were getting so much money from their wheat exports. Oh yeah, they started using better machinery, better seed quality, better fertilizers, and they were able to increase, true story, their output by 3 times. Now, it's not like those 10 or 20 times gains we've gotten since the Green Revolution of what we consider chemical fertilizers, NPK, and all the different GMOs and all the different weed application products and things, that are going to fight for the same nutrients in soil. You have to think about that. And going into the 1920s to 1930s, this was a massive shift globally. Whatever occurred then occurred across the globe. That old way of life from the 1880s to the 1910s, 1920s had to be dispensed with and bring in a new system. So the farmers, Ukraine, take it back to the late 1920s, they were, let's say, at total production of where they were. Suddenly in Europe, they started to produce some different machinery, and they brought that in, and they started to use it themselves. And wow, they were, becoming quite wealthy because of all these production gains. It wasn't, and they didn't really share. I guess I would say the Soviet government at the time didn't share the wealth through the rest of the nation. So one area, the Ukraine, became incredibly wealthy. And they were having living the heyday, mansions, servants, exports out. The world was just waiting in line for the next shipment of grain. Those same ports that you hear about today were the same ones that were exporting back in the 1920s and 30s also. But then the bourgeois class came in. And what happened? Well, point the finger, blame the farmers. Pol Pot, what do you think happened there? Blame the farmers. Take an entire city and move it out of into the countryside, and then because it failed and nobody in the city knew how to grow food, they blamed the farmers because they couldn't get the people in the city to grow the food. And then we got the same thing, the camps. How do you have famine and starvation in Cambodia? It's one of the richest soiled places on the planet with the most productive per square foot or per square acre of almost anywhere on the planet, food-wise. It's just Pol Pot. He removed everybody. I put on pen and said, all right, you got to walk out of the city. I hope everybody's familiar with the story. I guess, yeah, they try to do this ultimate utopia where, okay, next Friday, everybody's got to leave the city. If you're still in the city, we're going to send the army to sweep through, or you're going to be shot on sight. You need to all leave the city, take some belongings with you, whatever. We're going to burn the rest when you all leave. So you had this mass exodus of everybody leaving out of the city. Okay, and they went into the countryside and just overwhelmed all the towns and hamlets and villages to the point of like, whoa, where'd all these people go? And the government set about a public works project. Everybody grow food. You got to feed yourselves out in the countryside. And they're like, wait, you didn't plan to give us extra food to tide us over until the next harvest comes in with all these double, triple amount of people that are around here? And then anybody who criticized the government, gone. It's always been about the farmers. Anytime that there is a calamity economic coming in, they do blame a group of people, truckers, farmers. Now, what if you have a hobby farm or you're just like a family farm? Does that count inside you're the farmer, you're the problem? Or is that just mega farms like Monsanto owned, Sargenta owned and operated? See, I don't know how they can get away with that here in America. You could in Europe because the average farm size for medium to small holdings like 5 acres to 10 acres. There's some 50-acre farms. That's on the more corporatized things. If anything above 100 acres in Europe's corporate. Over here, anything above 1,000 acres is corporate, usually. Not going to say 100%, but once you're pushing 5,000 acres, you're definitely into corporate business. You can't even afford the property taxes on 5,000 acres. Of prime pasture land, that's going for like $18,000 to $20,000 an acre, 15. Even if it was 10 grand an acre at 5,000 acres, what's your property tax going to be? Even if it was just like a few percent, 50 grand a year, 70,000 a year just for the land minimum. That's being generous. So how could you blame the farmers this time without actually blaming corporate America here in the United States? Is my question. Now you might be able to get away with it over in Europe a little bit, because it's more privatized families until like a certain size. But, into the 1920s, it was the complete opposite. There was like one corporate farm for 99 other family farms. So this time, I don't know how they're going to be able to take that and push the blame directly onto farmers, because our corporate world is the farmers now. So how are they going to get the fingers to point back at themselves? Unless they say, oh, yeah, it's a little family farm guy here, like Dave with his few acres having some chickens and whatnot. Oh, it's my neighbor over there. He's got like 5 sheep. Those are the problem guys over there. They won't sell the 5 sheep to your city. Or they won't sell that 1 cow to your city or something like this. The 1 cow and the calf, they won't sell it to the city. They're selfish. They want to have their own 1 cow for milk. The dairy cow, you should need to share that with everybody. I just don't know how they're going to accomplish that goal this time of demonizing. I think it might be more toward the truckers, because a lot of truckers are small still comparatively. There's a lot of independent truckers out there that they could blame as the citizenry for stopping the trucking. Farming, I think they box themselves in a corner with too many big agribusiness owning too much land. I don't know how it's going to pan out, but this time it's going to be a little bit different than history. I'm looking forward to having a time machine, and looking back at this era and seeing who was pointed at as being the reason for the collapse. It's never going to be the actual people who caused the collapse in terms of politician, the leisure class, these royals, etc. The real money brokers, the real power and wealth on the planet that's been around for, like I say, thousands of years. So that'll never be blamed. It'll be somebody not driving their truck. It'll be somebody's little tiny 5-acre farm that caused the whole system to collapse. I don't know if you agree, but I guess I'll leave it there.
Well, unfortunately, I think it's very easy for them to do that. They use various, social mechanisms to blame people, but it seems like, throughout time, it's not hard to get a mob going to just point the finger at those people over there. Hey, look, they have a house. You don't. Hey, look over there. They have land. You don't. Hey, look over there. They've saved for the future. and you didn't. And you know why you didn't? It's because you couldn't, because they were hoarding and they were greedy. It's not going to be hard to tell mass amounts of people that the reason that they're hungry is because these groups of people are hoarding resources and won't capitulate to the world government body so that they could, equally distribute everything out to everybody that feels like they're entitled to have it. They've done it before in other places, and that idea is catching hold here in the U.S., and we have to fight it every second. Fight the whole idea of, Marxism. That's what it is. That's the tool that they use at the beginning, but we know the end result is a fascist communist state, and that's what they want for the whole world. We have to fight it at the local level. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that they plan on using for these things have a shelf life of their own, with various, things like skyrocketing cancer and the fact that everyone's going infertile and the birth rate is dropping. Everything's playing into their hands. It's like we've agreed to depopulate ourselves.
And that's a sad day because, getting any type of wildlife or seeing any types of even just farm animals, they protect their young with their own lives. The struggle for life and the yearning for life in the animal kingdom is something that is unmatched, where maybe we need to go back to more animal instinct of certain behaviors for self-preservation, because I don't see animals just walk into a euthanization clinic. They run as fast as they can away from the danger. Maybe that's a lesson for all of us. We need to learn from nature. Bye for now. DuByne, Ransom Godwin signing off here. MIAC Conversations. Put it to your friends and family. Oh, oilseedcrops.org. Sign up for the show notes. It goes out to you on a weekly. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Revolution.